The day June Baker buried her husband should have been filled with shared grief and quiet remembrance. Instead, it became the moment her daughter in law stood up and publicly accused her of crocodile tears. Welcome to her Fireside Stories, where family secrets burn brightest when exposed to the light. What this daughter in law didn't know, June's husband left behind one final message, a hidden truth so powerful it would not only silence her accuser, but completely transform their family's future forever. This isn't just about embarrassment or revenge, it's about a widow's dignity restored in the most unexpected way imaginable. And trust me, the moment you hear what was in that secret message, you'll understand why this story has become one of our most requested tales. Stay until the very end to witness the perfect balance of justice served with grace that only life's most genuine moments can deliver. If stories of vindication wrapped in wisdom speak to your soul, press that subscribe button now. Our Fireside family grows stronger with each new voice. Tell me in the comments, how would you respond if someone questioned your grief at your lowest moment? And where are you joining our circle from today? Now settle in with your favorite warm drink. The flames are high, and tonight's story burns brighter than most. You dare call me a liar in front of my husband's casket? The words tore out of my mouth before I could stop them, echoing through the flower-strewn chapel and catching every mourner off guard. In that split second, no amount of hushed conversation or respectful whispers could mask the shock that rippled through the pews. My name is June Baker, and I just buried the love of my life, Harrison Baker, a man who even at 73 still had a thick wave of salt and pepper hair that somehow looked both distinguished and playful. We'd been married for 50 years, half a century of devotion, quiet joys and shared sorrows, now reduced to this suffocating moment where I could barely breathe. Harrison and I built our life in a cozy, old-fashioned home filled with the soft hum of jazz records and the comforting smell of roasted coffee. He used to tease me about my short, neat silver bob, saying I was the classiest lady in town, even on those days when I felt anything but elegant. I could imagine him now perched in his favorite recliner in our living room telling me to hold steady as I tried not to crumble in the face of grief. The heartbreak was fresh, and I was sure it would remain fresh for a long while. Gathered around were friends, extended family, neighbors, everyone who had been touched by Harrison's warmth. My daughter Chloe hovered protectively near me, her long dark hair pulled into a tidy ponytail that swished back and forth every time she moved. My son Evan stood off to the side, his close-cropped hair and tall stature reminding me so much of his father that it tugged at my chest. But the real source of tension was Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, with her carefully styled waves and designer black dress that seemed more tailored for a boardroom than a funeral. In a single breath, she'd sneered at my tears and derailed any chance of a peaceful final goodbye. Everyone fell silent, eyes ricocheting between Vanessa and me, waiting to see if I would respond or run. The hush was so intense that I swore I could hear Harrison's voice telling me to stay calm. But how could I when Vanessa had just called my tears, fake mocking 50 years of love, and claiming I had no right to mourn? The service itself had begun in a solemn, respectful manner. The chapel was filled with lilies and white roses, Harrison's favorites, their sweet fragrance mingling with the heavy incense drifting from the altar. A soft piano piece played in the background, the melody so painfully beautiful that it only made the ache in my chest worse. I was seated in the front pew, hands clenched in my lap, trying to absorb the reality that Harrison, the man who knew me better than I knew myself, was no longer by my side. Chloe slid closer to me, offering comfort with a simple squeeze of her hand. She was fighting her own tears, her cheeks flushed from grief and fatigue, yet she stood firm, a testament to the quiet resilience that both Harrison and I had tried to instill in her. Behind us, friends and relatives I hadn't seen in years whispered their condolences. Some dabbed at their eyes with tissues. Others simply stared ahead, lost in their own thoughts or memories of Harrison. My son Evan was the one who worried me the most. He entered the chapel late, looking tense and withdrawn. Vanessa stayed so close to him, it was as if she were attached to his side, occasionally running her manicured nails along his arm, as though to remind him of her presence. Evan was typically soft-spoken, with a thoughtful demeanor that once brought him success in both academics and his early career. Lately, though, I'd watched him grow silent under Vanessa's influence, his once gentle expression replaced by something closed off and distant. When the pastor began to speak about Harrison's life, his love for volunteering at the local youth center, his knack for repairing anything mechanical, and his unwavering dedication to family, my chest tightened. I could barely absorb the words. Every memory felt like a fresh bruise, painful yet oddly precious. Just as the eulogy reached its most heartfelt moment, Vanessa chose to turn to a neighbor and whisper some snide remark. Even if I couldn't hear her exact words, the cruel smile on her face told me all I needed to know. She wasn't here to mourn Harrison. She was here to stake her claim. After the pastor finished, it was time for family to speak. Chloe went first, trembling but brave, sharing how her father taught her to ride a bike along the narrow trail behind our house. She recalled how Harrison would hold the seat until she found her balance, then let go just in time for her to glide on her own. She talked about all the science projects he helped her with, the father-daughter dances he never missed, and the way he'd stand on the porch every time she came home late, arms folded in mock sternness until she arrived safely. Her voice cracked on that last memory, tears slipping down her cheeks. Even so, Chloe forged ahead, determined to do Harrison proud. When she was done, there was a pause, an unspoken invitation for Evan to share a few words, but he shook his head, keeping his gaze fixed on the worn carpeting beneath our feet. I could see the indecision in his eyes, maybe even shame. Vanessa was quick to lean in, whispering something into his ear that made him nod in resignation. I swallowed a lump in my throat, wishing for the 100th time that day that I had the power to rewind time to see my son's open, genuine smile just once more. Then it was my turn. My legs felt like they'd turned to lead as I approached the podium. 50 years. That was how long Harrison and I had been together, and yet it still seemed like yesterday that he'd proposed to me under a blooming magnolia tree. I tried to speak to share what made Harrison so special. His unwavering kindness, his sense of humor, his deep sense of responsibility to others. But the enormity of my grief overwhelmed me. Tears slipped down my cheeks and my voice faltered. I didn't try to hide it. Grief for a love that endured half a century deserved to be seen. As I walked back to my seat, heart pounding, that's when Vanessa let out her venomous hiss, crocodile tears. How dare she, when everyone knows they were practically living separate lives? My world lurched on its axis. Had I misheard? A collective gasp rippled through the chapel, followed by tense silence. I froze mid-step, unable to believe that I'd just heard my daughter-in-law smear my marriage at Harrison's funeral. Heads turned sharply toward Vanessa, who did not bother to hide the smirk tugging at her red lips. A few people shot me sympathetic glances. Others seemed too stunned to know how to react. My daughter Chloe stood fist clenched at her sides. Fury radiated from her, and I worried she might launch herself at Vanessa if I didn't intervene. But the real heartbreak was the look on Evan's face. Conflict, humiliation, guilt. And yet he said nothing. He didn't defend me. He didn't even refute Vanessa's claim. He just lowered his gaze as though wishing he could disappear into the pew. I stumbled the rest of the way to my seat, my chest tight with betrayal. After everything Harrison and I had done for Evan, after all the late-night consolations, the financial help, the unconditional love, he couldn't speak a single word in my defense. The remainder of the service felt surreal, a haze of prayers, organ music, and the rustle of mourning attire. I barely registered it. My mind churned with Vanessa's cruel accusation. We hadn't been separated. Yes, Harrison spent some nights in the hospital near the end, and yes, the stress of his illness sometimes caused arguments. But we were never, ever estranged. I'd spent countless hours by his bedside, holding his hand as the chemo took its toll, praying for a miracle. No one could question my devotion to him. No one. When the service ended, I tried to slip away unnoticed, but the eyes of every attendee seemed locked on me, not in condemnation, but in pity. That stung even worse. I wanted none of their pity, none of their whispered condolences about how time would heal. The truth was, I was drowning in a tempest of sorrow and anger, and it only got worse when I remembered what was coming next. The reading of Harrison's will. He had insisted it be done immediately following the funeral, something I'd assumed was his way of ensuring clarity in a difficult time. Now I wondered if he had foreseen this exact drama and wanted everything settled in one decisive sweep. In the corridor outside the chapel, the funeral director softly directed us to the cars, waiting to take us to our attorney's office. The bright midday sun was jarring after the dimness of the sanctuary. I blinked rapidly, trying to pull myself together. Chloe hovered at my side, but Evan and Vanessa walked several paces ahead, their body language stiff and tense. Vanessa's glossy waves bounced elegantly as she strutted, looking every bit the woman on a mission. I could practically sense her anticipation for the will reading, and it turned my stomach. Harrison had always been meticulous, especially when it came to matters of family and finances. Ever since he was in his 20s, he'd had a knack for carefully planning out major decisions. He was the one who suggested we buy our modest home on Birchwood Lane before real estate prices soared. He was the one who insisted on stashing away emergency funds, which eventually covered Chloe's college tuition and helped Evan start his first business. So when he asked me several months into his final battle with cancer to not breathe a word about changes to his will, I trusted him. Though it wasn't easy, it was a weight I carried quietly, certain it was all for the best. I climbed into the car with Chloe while the rest of our family filed into their vehicles. Vanessa shot me a glare through the tinted window, and I shuddered. A part of me worried how far she would go to secure what she believed was rightfully hers. The ride to the attorney's office felt interminable, but maybe that was just my grief stretching every second into an hour. Chloe reached over, squeezed my hand, and offered a small, sad smile. I leaned against her shoulder, drawing what comfort I could from her steady presence. By the time we arrived, I was mentally bracing myself for a fresh wave of confrontation. My mind flashed with memories of Harrison, the day we married in that small church by the lake, the way he'd grin over his morning coffee, how he'd ruffle my hair and call me his silver fox once I stopped dyeing it. I needed to hold on to those memories now before Vanessa's greed tested every ounce of composure I had left. The attorney's office, a stately brick building lined with tall windows, exuded a quiet formality. Inside, Mr. Remington, a dignified man in his late 50s with a receding hairline combed to the side, greeted us in the lobby. He'd been our family's legal advisor for decades, guiding us through wills, property deeds, and any other matter Harrison felt needed attention. Today, he looked uncharacteristically tense, as though he anticipated a storm brewing. We were ushered into a large conference room with a long mahogany table. Fresh daisies in a small vase tried to lend a touch of warmth to the otherwise austere setting. Chloe and I sat on one side, while Evan and Vanessa perched on the opposite side, leaving a couple of empty seats between us. The tension was palpable. Outside, a gentle breeze rustled the office's garden. But inside, we were all holding our breath. Mr. Remington began by expressing condolences, then launched into a formal preamble about Harrison's last wishes. My heart thudded against my ribs, each beat echoing the unspoken question. How would Vanessa react? I dared a glance at her. She sat rigidly, her manicured fingers drumming against the table's glossy surface. Evan looked less hostile than he had at the funeral, but sorrow clung to him like a shadow. Finally, the moment arrived. Mr. Remington cleared his throat, pulled out a folder stamped with official seals, and started reading. To my wife, June Baker. I leave our family home at 731 Birchwood Lane, free and clear of any mortgage or lien, along with a monthly stipend of $4,000 for the remainder of her natural life. I felt my eyes burn with tears as relief mingled with grief. Vanessa, however, leaned forward like a hawk. The muscles in her face tightened, and she flicked a quick glance at Evan as if to say, "See, that's what I've been telling you." But, Mr. Remington continued, to my daughter, Chloe Baker, I leave the sum of $100,000 and my collection of first edition novels, which she has always admired. Chloe gasped softly, pressing a hand to her mouth. She'd always joked about those books, calling them Dad's secret treasure trove. Now they were hers. Vanessa's eyes were practically aflame, and we hadn't even gotten to what Harrison had left Evan. I braced myself. A tiny voice at the back of my mind whispered warnings. Harrison and I had talked at length about this, especially after we realized Vanessa's influence was draining Evan both financially and emotionally. Over the years, we'd lent or outright gifted him over $300,000 to help him out of various scrapes from business ventures that fell through to the down payment on the house. Vanessa insisted they buy Harrison, ever the record keeper, noted every transaction. He never asked for repayment. He just wanted to keep track. Mr. Remington continued, to my son, Evan Baker, I leave the sum of $10,000. Evan's face went white as a sheet. Vanessa shifted in her seat, disbelief etched in every line of her expression. Before anyone could protest, Mr. Remington held up a hand. However, he read, I have also established a trust fund in the amount of $250,000 for my grandson, Noah Baker, to be used exclusively for his education, health care, and basic needs, with Mrs. June Baker and Mr. Remington named as co-trustees. The sound of Vanessa's chair scraping the floor jolted everyone. She shot to her feet, outrage twisting her features. This is a joke, she spat. He can't just leave our money in a trust we can't touch. Mr. Remington didn't flinch. He'd likely expected this. It's all perfectly legal, he explained, placing a finger on the relevant clause in the will. Your husband was aware of the formalities and insisted on these restrictions. Evan looked torn between confusion and guilt. He stared at the table, hands trembling slightly, while Vanessa's anger swirled around him like a hurricane. But that's not all, Mr. Remington added, flipping to the final pages. The remainder of Harrison Baker's estate, his investments, retirement accounts, and the proceeds from a sizable life insurance policy have been allocated to the Heidi Baker Memorial Foundation for Pediatric Cancer Research. At the name Heidi Baker, both Chloe and I flinched. Heidi was the daughter Harrison and I lost when she was just 7 years old, a tragedy that shaped our lives forever. Harrison had now turned that heartbreak into a legacy for others. Vanessa's fury ignited like a match dropped on dry kindling. How dare he give our inheritance to charity? She spat, all decorum gone. It's not even that much money. But the venom in her voice said otherwise. She'd clearly expected a grand windfall, enough to settle whatever lavish debts she'd racked up. Chloe glared at her from across the table, anger tightening the corners of her eyes. He's honoring Heidi's memory, she said in a trembling voice. How can you be upset about helping children with cancer? Vanessa rolled her eyes, dismissing the sentiment. It took every ounce of my self-control not to snap at her. My mind flashed to the night Heidi passed away. How Harrison had held my hand so tightly, his knuckles turned white, whispering that he wished he could take her place. He never fully recovered from that loss, though he tried to channel his grief into helping others. Mr. Remington cleared his throat and pressed on, detailing the estate's breakdown. Each revelation seemed to further shatter Vanessa's composure. "We'll contest the will," she declared, pivoting sharply toward Evan. "There's no way your father was of sound mind. We'll prove it in court." She placed a hand on Evan's shoulder, her meticulously manicured nails digging into the fabric of his blazer. "You'd fight for us, wouldn't you?" "For your family?" Evan's eyes flickered with guilt and uncertainty. He stole a quick glance at me. Then in a small voice that broke my heart, he said, I need time to think." Vanessa's lips curled in disgust, but she said nothing. The tension in the room was suffocating each of us, grappling with our own version of heartbreak. Harrison, my beloved husband, was gone. Yet his presence loomed over this moment as if he'd orchestrated it to show who Vanessa really was. At last, Mr. Remington ended the meeting with a stack of legal papers in his hand. "I advise you to consider your next steps very carefully," he told Vanessa. Harrison Baker was thorough. Any attempt to challenge the will could reveal detailed financial records he kept over the years. Records that may paint you and Evan in a particular light. Once outside, Vanessa stormed off to the parking lot without a single backward glance. Her heels clacking furiously against the pavement, Chloe exhaled a breath she seemed to have been holding all afternoon. Evan, however, remained in the doorway, his features etched with a mixture of sorrow and confusion. I felt an urge to embrace him, to tell him that no matter what, I still loved him, always would. But the moment was fraught and he couldn't meet my eyes. Instead, he mumbled a half-hearted, "I'll call you," then trudged off after his wife. I felt drained, as though I'd lived an entire year in the span of a few hours. Despite the weight in my chest, a small spark of relief flickered inside me. Harrison had seen through Vanessa's intentions long before I dared suspect them. Our last real conversation in the hospital came rushing back to me. He'd been connected to tubes and monitors, but his mind was razor sharp. He confessed he'd made changes to his will, worried that Evan's future would be controlled by Vanessa's greed. "This is the only way," Harrison had murmured, squeezing my hand. "One day he'll realize we were doing this out of love." Chloe gently tapped my shoulder, stirring me from my thoughts. "Mom, you okay?" she asked, her tone laced with concern. Her ponytail had loosened in the flurry of the day's events, wisps of hair framing her face. I nodded, swallowing back tears that threatened to spill again. "I'll manage," I said, though the reality of returning to that now empty house on Birchwood Lane terrified me. We said our goodbyes to Mr. Remington, who offered his support should any legal challenges arise. Then Chloe and I headed home, driving in silence through streets that felt unfamiliar in my grief. When we pulled up to the house, I couldn't help but picture Harrison standing at the front window, waiting with a warm smile, his salt and pepper waves gently combed back for the evening. But that image was gone forever. Instead, there was just the hollow echo of my footsteps and the memory of a life well lived. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by a half-eaten sandwich and a scattered pile of sympathy cards. The window above the sink framed a moonlit sky, but I barely noticed. Each condolence message spoke of Harrison's generosity, how he'd changed their lives, or how his warmth had brightened their own darkest moments. In between the lines, I could sense a lingering question. Why was Vanessa so hostile? Why had Evan grown so distant? My mind churned back over the years. I recalled the first time Evan introduced Vanessa to us, a polished young woman who'd grown up in a bustling city, boasting an impressive background in marketing and a taste for designer clothing. Harrison, always the gentleman, welcomed her with open arms. But afterward, in a rare moment of candor, he admitted to me he didn't quite trust the gleam in her eye. At the time, I'd brushed off his concern, chalking it up to typical parental protectiveness. But the signs became impossible to ignore. She isolated Evan from us, insisted on ever more extravagant luxuries, and seemed to consider Harrison's generosity her personal well. Our modest nest egg dwindled with every loan we offered to bail them out. Harrison kept meticulous accounts, but never demanded the money back. He said, "They're our children. If we don't help, who will?" Still, as the years passed, I watched my son morph into a stranger under Vanessa's carefully orchestrated expectations. Rubbing my temples, I thought of the monthly stipend Harrison had left me. It was his final assurance I'd never have to beg for help. With tears threatening again, I flipped open a plain white envelope I hadn't noticed before. Inside, I found a handwritten note from Mr. Remington Harrison. Requested I pass along this key to you in private. He said you'd know where to use it when the time was right. My heart lurched. A key. Did Harrison have one last secret? I felt a strange mixture of apprehension and solace. If Harrison had left me a key, there had to be a reason. And knowing him, it was probably significant enough to shift the entire story. I just wasn't sure I was ready to uncover it yet. Sleep refused to come that night. I wandered through our home like a restless spirit, flicking on lamps in rooms I hadn't visited in days. The living room, with its antique clock chiming faintly still, carried the faint scent of Harrison's aftershave. His workshop in the garage, usually chaotic with half-finished carpentry projects, now felt eerily still, as though even the tools mourned his absence. Eventually, I ended up in our bedroom closet, staring at Harrison's suits hanging neatly in a row. I ran my fingers over the lapels, remembering the day he wore his gray one to our 40th anniversary party. His salt and pepper hair had been freshly trimmed, and I teased him about looking more handsome than ever. My breath caught in my throat. I missed him so fiercely it felt like a physical pain. And then I spotted it, a small fireproof safe tucked behind a stack of boxes. My heart pounded. The mysterious key from Mr. Remington sprang to mind. I rummaged for the key, my hands shaking with a mix of curiosity and dread. The lock clicked open easily, revealing a single manila envelope with my name, scrawled in Harrison's tidy handwriting. Inside lay a series of documents, bank statements, screenshots of text messages, and notarized letters. I flipped through them, my eyes widening in shock. They told a damning story of Vanessa's financial maneuverings funds siphoned from Evan's accounts, hidden credit cards, even brief consultations with a divorce attorney. A wave of nausea rolled through me. She had been planning to cut Evan loose for years, once she'd gotten enough out of him. This was the kind of proof that could decimate her claims in court if she tried to contest the will. My hands clenched around the papers. Harrison had seen everything coming. He'd documented it meticulously, leaving behind this arsenal to protect not just me, but Evan and our grandson Noah. And now it was my decision whether to reveal it. My pulse throbbed in my temples as I sank down on the closet floor. If Evan discovered the extent of Vanessa's betrayal, it could break him. But maybe, just maybe, it could also set him free. Morning sunlight filtered through the windows, painting the kitchen in a soft glow. I was sipping on a cup of tea when my phone buzzed. A text from Chloe. "Mom, Vanessa just posted something awful on social media. You might want to look." My stomach twisted. Of course she had. Vanessa thrived on spectacle. It was her specialty. Sure enough, when I opened my Facebook app there, it was an unhinged rant, accusing me of manipulating Harrison into rewriting his will while he was too weak to know better. She claimed I'd brainwashed him against Evan, that Chloe and I had conspired to secure the estate for ourselves. She'd even peppered her post with scathing remarks about my crocodile tears at the funeral, spinning a twisted narrative of a lonely old woman who craved attention. Comments had already started pouring in, some sympathetic to Vanessa, others questioning her motives. I set my phone down, hands trembling. Despite the injustice, a small voice in my head reminded me that the power of truth was on my side. I had the documents I had. Harrison's carefully laid plans. I had my own unwavering knowledge of how deeply we'd loved each other, no matter what Vanessa said. The only question was how to use that truth. Then, as if summoned by my turmoil, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Evan looking disheveled and haunted with dark circles under eyes that used to beam warmth. "Mom," he said softly, stepping inside. He clutched a suitcase in one hand, my heart constricted. Was he leaving Vanessa, or was this a temporary spat? He sank into a chair at the kitchen table, burying his face in his hands. "I had a fight with Vanessa," he said, voice muffled. "She wants me to help her contest Dad's will, but I can't. Something doesn't feel right about all this, and I saw what she wrote online. It's cruel. She told me if I won't go along with her plan, I'm betraying her and Noah." He looked up, eyes brimming with tears. "She said I had to choose between you and her. Part of me wanted to throw my arms around Evan and shield him from all the pain, but I also felt a well of anger. Anger at Vanessa for manipulating him, and anger at him for letting her. Yet seeing him so broken softened my resolve. Taking a deep breath, I placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You're my son," I said quietly. "I'll always love you no matter what you decide, but I think you deserve the truth." Evan frowned, confusion knitting his brows. "What truth?" That was my cue. I retrieved the manila envelope from the cupboard where I'd stashed it the night before. I explained how I found it in the safe, how Harrison must have left it for me, anticipating that Vanessa might challenge the will and drag our family's reputation through the mud. His eyes scanned the documents. The initial shock was visible bank transfers and Vanessa's name, suspicious credit card statements, and the draft of a petition for divorce she'd started months ago. It was all there, black and white. Each new page seemed to drain more color from his face. I fought the urge to reach out, worried that my touch might shatter the fragile hold he had on his emotions. She was planning to leave me," he finally asked, voice cracking. "She told her friends I was just a stepping stone." Tears welled up in his eyes. I'd never seen my son cry like that, not even when he was a child. He'd always been the type to bottle up his feelings. But now it was as though the dam had burst. I placed a hand over his trembling fingers. "Harrison wanted you to see this," I said softly. "He believed in you. He believed that once you knew the truth, you'd find your way back to the person you were before." Evan let out a ragged breath. "Before I met Vanessa, he finished for me, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. I didn't correct him. We both knew the damage she had done to him, how she'd eroded his confidence, turning him away from family and friends who might question her motives. For a moment, we just sat there, letting the enormity of the situation sink in. Outside, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the birch tree we'd planted years ago, back when Evan was a teenager. Full of promise and curiosity, I could almost hear Harrison's voice whispering in the back of my mind. "He'll come to his senses. June, just give him a chance." Evan finally spoke, his voice low. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry for standing by while Vanessa said all those things at the funeral. I'm sorry for believing her lies. He trailed off, eyes brimming with regret. "I wanted so badly for her to love me, for us to be this perfect couple. I didn't realize how toxic it all was. My heart broke for him. He was a grown man, but in that moment he looked like the little boy who used to cry over scraped knees. Except this was a wound no bandage could fix. I wrapped him in a tentative embrace, and for the first time in years, he hugged me back, without reservation. "We'll figure this out," I promised, voice wavering. "We'll protect Noah, and we'll make sure Vanessa doesn't take advantage of you anymore." At the mention of Noah, Evan drew back. The love for his son flashed in his eyes. Love and fear. "She's threatening to move out of state with him," he admitted, swallowing hard. "Said she'd cut off all contact unless I help her contest Dad's will." I clenched my jaw, anger brewing anew. But I also realized that Harrison had anticipated this possibility. That was why he'd locked away so much evidence enough to ensure Vanessa couldn't manipulate the legal system or weaponize custody. We have the upper hand, I reassured him. She won't win this in court once we show what your father found. Evan nodded, a spark of determination lighting his face. Then let's fight. I won't let her smear your name or Dad's memory or our family any longer. For the first time in a long while, he sounded like the Evan I remembered, a man with a conscience, a heart, and a backbone. The hours that followed were a whirlwind of phone calls, messages, and tense planning. Evan and I spread the documents across the dining room table, the same table where we once carved pumpkins together and played board games on rainy afternoons. The evidence Harrison had gathered was overwhelming. Logs of suspicious ATM withdrawals, screenshots of Vanessa badmouthing our family to her friends, and even legal memos from her earlier attempts to meet with divorce lawyers. Chloe arrived in the early afternoon, hair still in that slightly messy ponytail she wore since the funeral. Her eyes widened as we showed her everything. Dad was brilliant, she murmured, half in awe. He saw right through her. I nodded, though. Part of me wished that Harrison were still here to help us navigate the fallout. He'd been the cool head, the one who managed to think clearly, even in times of crisis. By the time we decided on our next steps, it was late evening. Evan would stay with me for a few days, giving him space from Vanessa. We'd contact Mr. Remington first thing in the morning, share Harrison's hidden files, and prepare for what would likely be an ugly legal standoff. Noah was with Vanessa's mother for the weekend, so at least he was out of the direct line of fire. For now, I ordered takeout for dinner, hoping that hot food might help settle our frayed nerves. As we ate in silence, I noticed the grief in Evan's eyes was now tinged with resolve. He glanced at a framed photo on the mantel, our family portrait from years ago. Harrison stood tall with that confident tilt of his chin, and I was at his side smiling as if life was as solid as the ground beneath my feet. Chloe was in high school then, braces on her teeth, and Evan was wearing a cap from his first job at the local grocery store. We'd been happy, a unit bound by mutual trust. Vanessa wasn't in the picture yet. In a moment of uncharacteristic boldness, Evan reached for his phone. I'm going to post my side of the story, he said. I can't let Vanessa's lies stand without a response. That night, as the digital world buzzed with Vanessa's drama-laced posts, Evan typed up a calm but firm statement. He explained how he loved his father dearly, how Harrison had been of sound mind until the end, and how the will reflected both the help he'd already given Evan and his desire to honor our late daughter Heidi, who passed from childhood leukemia. He acknowledged he and Vanessa were having marital problems, but stopped short of revealing the full extent of her betrayal. He'd save that for the court if it came to it. With trembling fingers, he hit post. We watched in real time as reactions poured in. Some expressed shock at how Vanessa had twisted the narrative. Old friends of Harrison, upon seeing Evan's post, chimed in with stories of his kindness and clarity of mind. Extended family, those who'd been at the funeral and witnessed Vanessa's outburst, commented in solidarity. A few neutral acquaintances urged both sides to keep it private, but the majority reaction tilted in our favor. Evan's phone lit up with messages, some supportive, some furious, presumably from Vanessa. At one point, he flinched at his screen. She's threatening to call the police on me, saying I'm emotionally unstable, he said, reading off her text. My jaw tightened. She can't do that without grounds, and if she does try, we have the evidence to show her pattern of manipulation. Not long after the doorbell rang, my pulse spiked. Vanessa. But when I looked through the window, it was just a delivery driver with a manila package. Inside was a set of legal forms from Mr. Remington, along with a handwritten note telling us to gather any additional files we had. He planned to expedite a court hearing regarding the trust for Noah and the estate contest. I breathed a sigh of relief. At least things were moving forward in an official capacity. Before heading to bed, Evan made up the couch in the living room, though I offered his old room. I can't bear to see the bedroom I grew up in, he admitted, eyes downcast. Not tonight. It'll remind me too much of what I've lost. I understood. He needed space to process. I gave him a gentle hug and turned in, hoping, praying that Harrison was watching over us with a proud, loving gaze. Morning arrived with a flurry of paperwork and phone calls. Mr. Remington scheduled an urgent appointment for us at his office. This time it was just me, Evan, and Chloe, leaving Vanessa out of the loop. On the drive over, Evan stared out the window, wrestling with the guilt of a husband planning to fight his wife in court. Chloe, in the back seat, occasionally reached forward to pat his shoulder. The entire situation felt like a fever dream. Yet it was our reality when we arrived. Mr. Remington greeted us with a tight smile. "I'm sorry for the circumstances," he said, ushering us into a private conference room. "But I'm glad you found Harrison's documentation." June, it's exactly what we need to protect the estate and uphold his final wishes. He took the manila envelope, scanning each page with a meticulous eye. Occasionally, he'd whistle under his breath, shaking his head at Vanessa's brazenness. After reviewing the evidence, Mr. Remington looked up. "From a legal standpoint, your father's will stands on strong ground. He was of sound mind, and the distribution is his prerogative. Vanessa's only angle to challenge it would be undue influence or mental incompetence. But these hospital reports," he said, gesturing to Harrison's medical records, "state that Harrison remained lucid despite his illness. Combined with the financial records revealing Vanessa's manipulations, her credibility would crumble in court." Evan let out a long exhale of relief but also sorrow. He understood that exposing Vanessa's wrongdoings meant tearing the last shreds of their marriage apart. "What about Noah?" he asked softly. "She threatened to leave with him if I don't comply with her demands." Mr. Remington tapped a pen on the table. "We can file a custody petition. The evidence of her financial instability and attempted manipulation will bolster your case, especially the trust your father created for Noah's needs. Judges don't look kindly on parents who use children as leverage." Chloe put an arm around Evan's shoulders. "You'll get through this," she murmured, "and you won't be alone." Dad made sure of that. For a fleeting moment, the tension in the room melted, replaced by a collective gratitude for Harrison's foresight and love. The next few weeks passed in a blur of court filings, emotional confrontations, and endless discussions with lawyers. Vanessa, upon being served legal documents, erupted online again, calling me vindictive and Harrison senile. She flung accusations, claiming we'd forged signatures and manipulated medical charts. But her desperate rants only exposed the lengths she'd go to cling to a fortune that wasn't hers. Evan stayed with me through it all. His presence brought both comfort and a daily reminder of the heartbreak he felt. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find him sitting at the dining room table, staring at old family photos spread out before him. He'd trace a fingertip over images of him and Harrison fishing at the lake, or of Heidi's bright smile during her final birthday. "I wasted so many years." "Mom," he'd say, voice choked. "Dad tried to warn me, but I didn't listen." I'd always respond the same way. "You were trying to make your marriage work." There's no shame in that. Still, it hurt to see him carry such a heavy burden of regret. Meanwhile, Noah, only 8 years old, became the tug-of-war rope Vanessa tried to use. She insisted to the court that we were dangerous, that we tried to cut Noah out of any inheritance, but the trust showed the opposite. We'd secured funds to ensure Noah's education and well-being. Every time Vanessa's deceit was called out in a legal document, her fury intensified. Finally, the day of the custody hearing arrived. The courthouse was a stark building of white stone and tall pillars. My heart pounded as I stepped through the doors, with Evan by my side. Chloe promised to watch from the gallery, offering moral support. Vanessa arrived with her own attorney, wearing a sleek black pantsuit and an icy glare. Her carefully styled waves looked as perfect as ever. But behind those eyes, I sensed panic. She knew the evidence was stacked against her. During the hearing, Mr. Remington presented Harrison's meticulously compiled records, bank statements, emails, even text messages where Vanessa referred to me as the old hag standing between us and the big payday. My stomach twisted when I heard that, but I forced myself to remain composed. Vanessa's lawyer tried to pivot by suggesting that Harrison was heavily medicated in his final weeks and thus susceptible to manipulation, but the medical records directly contradicted this, stating he was mentally competent and making informed decisions up until his last days. The judge listened intently, flipping through the paperwork with a measured gaze. Despite Vanessa's impassioned plea that she was only trying to protect her family, the factual evidence of her financial malfeasance was impossible to ignore. When the time came for Evan to speak, he recounted how his father had been a rock of stability, ensuring that no matter what his children and grandson were cared for. He spoke of his own role, admitting he'd turned a blind eye to Vanessa's manipulations for far too long. I wanted to believe our marriage was built on love, he said, voice trembling, but I realize now it was built on convenience for her. He also made it clear he didn't want to strip Vanessa of all rights. He simply wanted to protect Noah from a toxic environment. The trust fund for Noah, Evan insisted, was Harrison's greatest gift, ensuring that no matter how the marriage ended, Noah would have a future. That statement seemed to resonate with the judge, who nodded, scribbling notes. In her rebuttal, Vanessa put on quite a performance, tears glistening dramatically in her eyes. She claimed it was all a misunderstanding, that she'd only hidden money because she was terrified of being left with nothing if Evan abandoned her. But the authenticity of her tears evaporated once the text messages were read out loud, especially the part where she joked about going Gucci shopping. Once the old man finally kicks it, a hush fell over the courtroom. Vanessa's tears stopped abruptly and her cheeks flushed. The judge requested a short recess. I stepped into the hallway, my heart pounding so hard I worried I might faint. Chloe clutched my arm. "It's going to be okay, Mom," she whispered, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. Evan paced back and forth, his anxiety all too evident. This was the crux of it all. Would justice be served, or would Vanessa manage to wriggle free of accountability? When court reconvened, the judge delivered a decisive ruling. He found no evidence that Harrison had been coerced or manipulated. The will stood as written, and there would be no contest allowed, based on the arguments Vanessa had presented. As for custody, Evan was granted primary custody of Noah, with Vanessa receiving supervised visitation. The court mandated therapy and parenting classes for her, citing concerns over the emotionally manipulative texts and the financial recklessness she exhibited. A heavy silence descended as the judge banged the gavel, officially sealing Vanessa's defeat. She stood there, her face pale and her once defiant posture sagging as she realized the magnitude of what she'd lost. Her attorney mumbled something about appealing, but with the evidence so clearly laid out, an appeal seemed futile. Vanessa spared me a single glare of pure venom before turning on her heel and marching out of the courtroom. At the sight of Evan's relief, I felt tears sting the corners of my eyes. He closed them, exhaling a shaky breath, and pulled me into a hug. Chloe joined us, forming a small circle of comfort. For the first time since Harrison died, I felt a sensation akin to hope. Hope that our family could heal, that we could honor Harrison's memory by living the values he instilled in us. Outside the courthouse, a handful of extended family members and friends who had come to show support greeted us with hugs and quiet cheers. Even some acquaintances who had seen the online drama were there, apologizing for ever believing Vanessa's spin. I found myself nodding graciously, too exhausted to be angry. Honestly, all I wanted was to go home, drink a cup of tea, and find a moment of stillness to speak to Harrison, in my heart telling him we had done it. We protected his legacy, just as he'd protected us. Evan, Chloe, and I decided to celebrate quietly. We took Noah, who was overjoyed to see his dad again, out for ice cream. Watching my grandson's eyes light up as he devoured a double scoop of chocolate and mint, I couldn't help but imagine Harrison's wide grin if he were there with us. And in my mind, he was. A year passed after that day in court. Life didn't magically become perfect, but it settled into a new, healthier rhythm. Evan, once distant and subdued, reemerged as the caring, thoughtful man Harrison and I had raised. He rented a cozy apartment near Birchwood Lane, wanting to stay close so Noah could visit me after school. He even reverted to a more classic hairstyle, short, easy to manage, more like the practical cut he had in college. "Feels more like me," he said with a small smile, as if shedding the old style Vanessa had insisted upon was one more way of breaking her hold. Vanessa, for her part, drifted in and out of Noah's life. She showed up for a few supervised visits initially, but as time went on and her appeals fell flat, the visits became sporadic. She eventually moved out of state, chasing some new dream or new benefactor. Noah, while occasionally missing her, seemed happier without the constant tension and fights. We never spoke ill of Vanessa in front of him. Kids make sense of the world in their own way, and we didn't want to cloud his innocence more than necessary. Chloe visited often, bringing home-cooked meals or groceries, fussing over me when I tried to do too much yard work on my own. She'd grown even closer to me in the aftermath of everything, as though determined to fill some of the void Harrison left behind. And I'll admit, the house felt quieter without him. No gentle hum of his old radio. No clinking of the tools he loved to tinker with. Still, I felt his presence in the small things: a record left on the turntable, the half-finished wooden birdhouse in the garage, and the affectionate notes he'd occasionally hide in my recipe book. Through it all, I found solace in continuing the foundation he set up in Heidi's name. The Heidi Baker Memorial Foundation began raising funds for pediatric cancer research, hosting small charity events in our community. Evan and Chloe pitched in, volunteering their time and sharing Harrison's vision. Every check we mailed out reminded me of the promise Harrison had made the night Heidi slipped away. "Her life will mean something," he'd whispered, tears soaking his cheeks. "We'll make sure of it." Today, our home feels both bittersweet and hopeful. The garden is in full bloom, vibrant with daisies and lilies, flowers that once filled the chapel at Harrison's funeral. Noah, now 9, plays in the backyard chasing fireflies or kicking a soccer ball with uncontainable energy. He sometimes stops to chat with me about his favorite dinosaur or how he wants to learn to fish, just like Grandpa Harrison did. I always nod, telling him we can go to the same lake where Grandpa taught Evan so many years ago. The thought of passing on that tradition sets a warm glow in my chest. Evan has thrown himself into fatherhood wholeheartedly. He attends every parent-teacher conference, helps with homework, and even started coaching a little league soccer team. Seeing him light up whenever he's around. Noah reassures me that despite the heartbreak, he's on a path of recovery. Sometimes in quiet moments, he'll mention Harrison. He'll talk about the advice Harrison once gave him, or how he regrets not being around more during those last months. All I can do is remind him that Harrison loved him fiercely and left us the tools to stand on our own 2 feet. The family home on Birchwood Lane, which I fully own now, has become a gathering place. Chloe swings by with a bottle of wine to unwind after her long shifts at the hospital. Evan drops Noah off for a weekend sleepover. Neighbors pass through with baked goods or garden clippings, remembering Harrison's generosity. In many ways, I've found a second family in these kind souls who keep us afloat with love and shared memories. Every so often, I catch a glimpse of the old me, a woman trembling at a funeral, humiliated by her daughter-in-law's accusations. The shame used to burn hot, but now it's faded into a lesson learned about the dangers of letting someone's toxic words define you. I know now that grief and anger can coexist, but they don't have to overshadow the beautiful legacy Harrison built. He may be gone, but his presence lingers in the orchard where we picked apples each fall, in the laughter that echoes when the kids gather for board games, and most of all, in the unwavering bond that remains among those who truly loved him. Late one afternoon, I found myself flipping through Harrison's old leather notebook, a journal he kept during his illness. I discovered it almost by accident, tucked between cookbooks in the kitchen cabinet. Inside were pages of his looping handwriting, little reflections about life, our marriage, and the future he imagined for our family. One entry stuck out. Sometimes you have to prune the diseased branch so the rest of the tree can flourish. I hate to call Vanessa a diseased branch, but I fear her intentions might break Evan. If I must be the bad guy from beyond the grave, so be it. Better that I protect him now than see him crushed later. Reading that, tears blurred my vision. It was so quintessentially Harrison, down to earth, practical, and fiercely protective. He'd loved Evan enough to take a stance that would risk misunderstanding, even hatred. But in the end, he was right. He'd sacrificed the illusion of harmony for the reality of safeguarding our family. It comforted me to realize how deeply he'd thought this through. He never acted out of spite or malice. His only motive was love. Later that same day, Evan came over with Noah. They brought a small chocolate cake as a surprise. "It's just a random 'we love grandma' cake," Evan joked, though I sensed some deeper sentiment behind it. We sliced into the cake, laughing as the frosting smeared over plates. Noah explained he'd drawn a picture of Grandpa Harrison at school, standing beside me in front of our old house. My heart melted. Even though Harrison was gone, our grandson was growing up with stories and images that kept him alive in spirit. That night, after Noah was tucked into bed in the same study where Harrison used to read his detective novels, Evan and I sat on the porch swing. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in oranges and pinks. We talked about the upcoming foundation event, about the new recipes I wanted to try, and about Harrison's unwavering support, even in death. Looking at my son, I could see the man he was always meant to be, free from the toxic grip that nearly destroyed him. Not long ago, Vanessa made one last attempt to contact Evan. She'd sent a terse message claiming she was ready to renegotiate custody terms if Evan was willing to revisit the will's distribution. Her desperation was transparent. Evan showed me the text, and for the first time, I saw no lingering hesitation in his eyes. He simply replied that the courts had spoken, and if she wanted more visitation, she should comply with the therapy requirements. He ended by saying he hoped she'd find her own path to peace. That was it. No further barbs, no emotional meltdown. In that moment, I felt an indescribable relief. Evan had finally broken free from any residual hold Vanessa had on him. He chose to respond with dignity and compassion, exactly what Harrison would have done. A day later, Vanessa blocked him on social media and vanished from our daily existence. It's odd how quietly some stories close without fanfare or dramatic last stands, just the final fade out of someone who was never really part of us to begin with. Now, as I stand in the backyard with the sun warm on my face, I feel more connected to Harrison than ever. I can almost see him in the rustle of leaves and the flicker of sunlight dancing across the grass. The wind tousles my short silver bob, and I smile remembering how he used to tease me about being the cool grandma. A sense of serenity wraps around me like a soft blanket, even amid the lingering sorrow of his absence. A few steps away, Noah is helping Evan paint the birdhouse. Harrison never finished. Chloe is on her phone organizing the next charity event for the Heidi Baker Memorial Foundation, determined to raise more funds to fight childhood leukemia. And me, I'm standing here thinking about how it all began with that shocking confrontation at the funeral. Vanessa tried to humiliate me, reduce my grief to a spectacle, But Harrison's final testament and my unwavering love turned the tables. She's gone, and all she left behind is a cautionary tale about greed and manipulation. Harrison once wrote that real legacy isn't money or property. It's the love and lessons you leave behind. He left plenty for us, enough to rebuild the broken pieces, enough to remind us that family in its truest form can outlast even the worst storms. And as I watch my son and grandson laugh under the late afternoon sun, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that Harrison was right. As the final embers of June Baker's story glow in our circle tonight, I hope you felt that moment when justice and healing intertwined, when her late husband's foresight transformed humiliation into triumph. Some wounds run deeper than words can reach yet. This widow's quiet dignity in the face of accusation reminds us of a truth we sometimes forget. The people who truly know us leave echoes of their love long after they're gone. Which part of June's journey touched you most? Was it the moment she stood tall amidst her grief? Or perhaps Harrison's final gift that protected her, even from beyond? I'm waiting to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to share where your own fireside is burning tonight. Before our paths part until next time, if June's story resonated in the chambers of your heart, consider becoming part of our Her Fireside Stories family. With a simple click of that subscribe button, each story we share here becomes a thread in the tapestry that connects us all. Remember, we never truly know the silent battles others fight, nor the strength they carry within. Perhaps that's the most precious lesson June leaves with us tonight. Until we meet again by these warming flames, hold your loved ones close. Speak your truths gently and know that your own story matters more than you realize. This is Her Fireside Stories, where every ending illuminates a new beginning.